Sophia was the most beautiful girl in their group, and Lucas immediately set his eyes on her. However, he wasn't the only one. Sophia was popular among guys. The only problem was that she didn't seem to notice them at all. On one hand, it bothered Lucas, and on the other hand, it reassured him. He kept thinking, what if Sophia was different? But no, everything was fine. Despite her model appearance, Sophia was quite modest. It turned out her parents were quite strict. It was surprising how they eventually allowed her to go out. As she later recounted, they used to restrict her to the courtyard. She rebelled only when she entered college. Lucas liked her from the start, but she was initially shy and didn't know how to communicate with guys. So, while they were getting to know each other, they lost almost a month of potential relationship. But then they made up for it and enjoyed their time together to the fullest. Sophia's parents were concerned. Everything they had tried to avoid during her teenage years, she embraced after turning 18. They say what will be, will be. If the transitional phase is destined to happen, let it be in early age when you can still influence the child. Sophia had it all at once, coming home at 5 in the morning, overnight outings, and even a visit to the police station when she and Lucas tried to steal flags before a holiday just for fun. It was harmless, but nevertheless, at 3 in the morning, it was considered hooliganism. Fortunately, Sophia went through this phase with Lucas. Her parents initially hated him and even tried to forbid her from associating with this troublemaker. But when Lucas proposed and took care of the wedding entirely, they calmed down. Well, what's the big deal? Who didn't act up in their youth? A little over a year after the wedding, Sophia gave birth to twin girls who looked a lot like her, tanned, dark-haired brunettes with sharp brown eyes. Real French girls, as Lucas would say about his daughters. However, he didn't notice the strange look exchanged between Sophia's parents in the maternity ward. "Mom, Dad, we've never had twins in the family," Sophia exclaimed in surprise. "Well, someone has to be the first," her father joked. Lucas didn't find anything extraordinary about it. When he was in school, there were 2 pairs of twins in their class, Caleb and Liam, 2 boys, and Zoe and Natalie, 2 girls. They all got married on the same day after school. Their classmates teased them. "How will you tell each other apart?" Well, does it really matter? So, twins were nothing unusual for Lucas. The girls, Lilo and Scarlett, grew rapidly and developed remarkably harmoniously. At 2 years old, they could talk incessantly in complete sentences, and by 3, they were already reading. Sophia devoted all her time to her daughters, constantly engaging with them, as if in a hurry to accomplish something within a very short time allotted to her. Sophia and the girls were in a car accident when the little ones were just 3.5 years old. Sophia died in front of her daughters before the ambulance arrived. The girls were unharmed. There wasn't even a scratch. Lucas didn't just feel like life had stopped. He thought he would die soon after Sophia. It wasn't just painful to wake up for him. Even thinking was painful. He simply didn't want to live. There was no reason to. The tragedy caused the girls to stop speaking. No one could help, not doctors, not psychologists, no one. Unfortunately, it happens, especially with children who have recently learned to speak and haven't fully developed their language skills, losing them so easily due to stress. The girls fell silent, seemingly forever. Besides, they stopped playing altogether. They just sat and stared at each other, sometimes drawing, mostly broken cars, which wasn't surprising. The girls stopped laughing and even smiling. The little beautiful angels turned into wrinkled old women with sad, crying eyes. It broke Lucas's heart to see them like this, and neither he nor anyone else could help them. Life seemed to be over. Then someone suggested to Lucas to immerse himself in work. So he did. Lucas worked like a man possessed, putting in 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Lucas was lucky, his efforts were not in vain. He found himself in the right stream and the right system. In less than a year, he amassed his first million, and in the following year, he tripled that figure. But, of course, he wasn't sweeping streets or handling sacks. Lucas had a knack for using his intellect from childhood. In this short period, he became the chief commercial officer of a holding company, the youngest and most successful manager. During this time, Sophia's mother took care of the girls. Sophia's father passed away 6 months after his daughter's death. Unable to bear the tragedy, his heart failed him, already weakened. Sometime earlier, Lucas had asked his father-in-law about his heart condition, but he somehow evasively joked and never said anything concrete. So, the careless actions of one drunk driver, not exactly destroying the family but dividing their life into before and after, took away the two most beloved people, the mother during the accident and her father 6 months later. What hurt the most was that they never found the driver who hit all three of them on the crosswalk. Strangely, it happened exactly in a location without any surveillance cameras around, and there were no witnesses. Although the place wasn't deserted, no one saw anything. Only screeching brakes and the girl's screams were heard. The criminal fled the scene. Until the ambulance arrived, no one remembered the car's license plate or even its color. Now, the grandmother found solace in her granddaughters, the father in work, and the girls just remained silent. Lucas's work in the holding had long been working for him. Multiplying his capital, he saved money for the girls' future treatment. Though doctors were currently helpless, perhaps something could be done in the future because medicine doesn't stand still. At work, things were going very well for Lucas. He was the youngest and most successful employee, rising from a simple manager to the level of chief commercial officer. However, there was still room for growth. The career ladder didn't end at such positions. He could become a vice president, eventually the president of the holding, and then join the board of directors and even aim for co-ownership. But that was in the future. Many ladies and socialites wouldn't mind gaining Lucas's attention, especially his heart. But he remained indifferent to any manifestations of female care and attention. Lucas still loved Sophia, he just couldn't come to terms with her death physically. Though he organized the funeral and memorial services himself, there was no realization that Sophia was no longer in the world. He saw her here and there. He saw her in crowds, among people in cafes, in transportation, at the station, on trains. The feeling that she hadn't departed to another world never left him, that she was somewhere here, nearby yet far away at the same time. Lucas didn't share his feelings with anyone, he just didn't want to scare his mother-in-law. The children were still too young to hear their father's revelations, and strangers might misunderstand him and send him to a psychiatric hospital. He certainly didn't want that. However, sometimes, Lucas thought that being in a mental institution wouldn't be the worst option. Then, at least, it would be clear what was happening to him. He tried his best not to spill his emotions outwardly. So, at that time, there was no room for other women and definitely no room for other relationships. Colleagues at work, of course, knew about the tragedy in his family, but alas, people are quite callous towards others' sorrows. No one wants to experience someone else's feelings. Yes, the young employee lost his wife. But hey, he's young. So what if he grieves, he'll remarry? Only a few understood that this story wasn't about Lucas. Sophia still appeared in his dreams, almost every night, and these dreams were so vivid that he felt her touch, her scent, her hair on his cheeks. Many times, he woke up with a sense of relief, thanking God that it was all a dream. There was no accident. And only by turning towards where Sophia used to sleep or simply reaching back, he realized that, no, it wasn't a dream. Everything was there, the accident, the tragedy, and the girls now being ill. On the contrary, what he had just seen and felt was the dream, and he lived in a cruel reality. And a reality he would gladly never return to. Only the girls kept him here. But let's shift from Lucas's personal experiences to how the management treated him at work. Yes, he was one of the leading commercial directors, but he also had superiors, the board of directors from the holding's co-owners. They decided to send the young emerging millionaire on a business trip. The holding was constantly expanding, a new enterprise needed to be opened, construction needed to be organized. All of this had to be supervised. Technically, it was a promotion for Lucas. However, the business trip involved an extended stay at the site. He would have to leave for at least 6 months, possibly even staying for a couple of years later. It was a kind of a joke from the management's side. Why was he so young and successful? Let's put him in non-standard, unfavorable conditions and see how he handles the situation. If he copes, then there's something in him. No one cared that the man was living on his last strength. No one inquired about Lucas's true feelings or the fact that he had not the healthiest children in the world. And, as is known, against a broken door, there's no defense. Refusing meant simply picking up his box of personal belongings from the office the next morning. Lucas had no plans to part with this job, but he also had no plans to part with his children. So, he decided to take the girls with him. But how will you manage there? His mother-in-law asked Lucas. Well, others manage, too, replied Lucas. Others have full families, Lucas, and healthy children, said Isabella. What's wrong with my family? I think it's very full, Lucas answered. Full of what? Memories? Lucas, those are only your memories. The girls don't remember what happened. They hardly remember Sophia, and they need a real mother. Haven't you thought about that? Isabella said. And don't you think that it's your efforts that made the girls forget their mother? Didn't you remove all the photos of Sophia and hide her things? Lucas retorted. Well, looking at those things made me want to hang myself, Lucas. Everything around reminded me of Sophia, and it was not far from a mental hospital. But, in the end, you can't live in a museum, it won't bring my daughter back. Lucas, life goes on, we have to move forward, for the sake of the children, Isabella replied. In general, they had fundamentally different views on the problem. Isabella was a pragmatist, she regretted the loss but understood the need to move forward. She, being an almost old woman, could mourn her daughter's loss. But he, the young man, could marry again, have more children. He could find a woman who would be good to the girls. Perhaps, then, they would open up and stop being silent, especially since they would soon be going to school. Did he really have to take them to a special institution? Isabella had another fixation since her daughter's death, to marry Lucas to the daughter of her longtime friend. She constantly whispered in Lucas's ears about how good of a girl Amelia was. She loves children and all that. One problem, Isabella, the girls can't stand your Amelia. And I can't either, Lucas once said to his mother-in-law. What are you talking about? Sophia has been friends with Amelia since childhood. The girls were always happy when Amelia came over. You just didn't see it because you were always at work, Isabella replied. But now I see how the girls literally shrink when she appears in the house. I've wanted to ask you for a long time, Isabella, to stop inviting this woman to our house. But now that we are leaving, it doesn't matter who you invite, Lucas asserted. Soon they left, but not everything was as easy as Lucas initially thought. In the remote village where the factory was being built, there was something like a kindergarten, but there was no housing. Not all residents welcomed the construction, and no one wanted to let Lucas stay in the village. They understood that the factory was opening there because of cheap labor. People knew that the wages would be significantly different from those at the factory in the capital, for example. They couldn't do anything about it, and there was no more work in the village, so no one was willing to give or sell housing to the future branch director. All Lucas could find was an old village house, kilometers away from the village. Well, nothing, thought Lucas. I'll drive, take the kids to daycare, and go to the construction site. But it wasn't that simple. The daycare immediately refused him and didn't even take the money. No, they said, there's no space. Although in two groups that Lucas saw, there was an obvious shortage of children. He understood that he would have to fight for the existence of the plant, and this was just the beginning of the battle. But he wasn't a pushover either. He had to leave the girls alone at home for a while. After all, it's just a village. Where could they go? Lucas remembered well how he used to come to the village to his grandmother, though it was a long time ago. But they left him alone without any problems, even at a younger age. He would wake up, find a jug of milk covered with a towel on the table, and a healthy slice of homemade bread. That was his breakfast. He would drink the milk in one gulp, but dealing with such a huge piece of real homemade bread baked by his grandmother in the Russian stove was beyond him. He would eat half and put the other half in his pocket, then run out to play. All he had to do was prop a log against the door so that the cats wouldn't get in. In the villages, no one locked their doors, and the log propped against the door indicated that no one was home. That's how it was, almost communism. In general, the girls were left alone at home. They just had to keep matches away. For some reason, Lucas was panically afraid of fire. But the trouble came from where it was least expected. A fire broke out at the factory, not at his home. But more on that later. When he was at his grandmother's in the village as a child, there was a rainy day once. His grandmother went to the farm where she worked, regardless. Cows don't understand whether it's raining for people, snowing, or a volcano erupting. They want to eat every day, and every day they want to be milked and cleaned. So, like it or not, his grandmother went to the farm almost every day. The young milkmaids always asked him to substitute for them. His grandmother was alone, while they had families and children. Lucas only came in the summer. Well, there was no grandmother at home. It was wet and chilly outside, and cold inside. Instead of closing the window, Lucas decided to show his grandmother that he was already grown up and started to kindle the stove. Luckily, the window was open, or Lucas would have suffocated in that smoke. At first, he did everything right, arranged the firewood, placed a piece of paper for kindling. The only thing the city boy didn't consider was that before lighting the match, he needed to open the damper in the chimney, which prevented the smoke from escaping. The boy lit the stove, added firewood, but there was no draft. Smoke filled the kitchen, then the room. Lucas didn't understand why everything worked well for his grandmother and not for him. He took the poker and started stirring the firewood in the stove. A spark jumped out, caught the floor and the nearby firewood. Thankfully, the neighbors had noticed the smoke pouring generously from the same window. They arrived before the fire could spread through the kitchen. They extinguished everything, pulled Lucas, who was almost scared to death, from under the table. And here came the grandmother from the farm. She had already been informed. Lucas got a scolding then. For 3 days, sitting on a hard bench was painful. Since then, he had been afraid of fire, matches, and fire, not so much from the fire itself, but from his grandmother. But it was summer, and there was no need to heat the stove. The girls, however, didn't think of that. And he still hid the matches. One trouble in the village, from nowhere, gypsies. Locals said that there were none before, but a camp appeared out of nowhere 2 years ago. With horses and wagons. They settled by the river as usual. They thought they would stay for the summer and leave, but they spread around the area, occupied old abandoned houses, built their own, and some still slept by haystacks. In general, they stayed in the village. Now, everywhere you looked, you would always see a gypsy man or woman. There was no escape from them, although they didn't cause much harm either. People just started leaving the village. They didn't want such neighbors. In their camp, they had their own rules and laws. Lucas understood little about gypsies. He didn't bother them, and they seemed to avoid him. Just for the sake of propriety, he nodded his head when passing by or seeing someone in the village. But, just in case, he strictly prohibited the girls from leaving the house without him. The girls were already 5 years old. In principle, they should be reasonable and understanding, but who knows what's on their minds? They nodded their heads, whether they understood or not, and what they understood couldn't be known. They didn't even try to say yes or no, just nodded in agreement or shook their heads as a denial. That's how they communicated. Lucas no longer dreamed that the girls would ever start talking. He just wanted to make them smile for a moment, or at least bring a smile to their faces, but no, nothing. Just stone faces, as if they had seen the Gorgon Medusa. And on their birthday, Isabella added insult to injury. She came to their village with that same Amelia. The girls had just started to recover. Perhaps, indeed, it wasn't easy for them to live in a house where even the walls reminded them of their mother. Here in the village, the house wasn't as luxurious as in the city, old windows, leaning walls. But everything here was interesting, everything was new. It seemed that a little more, and they would start talking, asking questions, bursting with curiosity. And here, on their birthday, as soon as they saw Amelia coming out of the car, they again, as if little animals, curled up into a ball and closed themselves off. I don't understand, Lucas. What are you doing with the children that they are so repressed by you? This lady uttered. She leaned towards the girls and smiled. Lucas saw his daughters even squinting with displeasure. Isabella, why did you bring her? You know she's unpleasant to us, Lucas quietly said to his mother-in-law. My dear, she's unpleasant to you, but the girls need communication with women. They need an example of female behavior before their eyes, otherwise, they will grow up, God forgive me, like two tomboys. You can ignore Amelia as a woman, but don't you dare ignore your girls. First and foremost, you should think about them now, Isabella stated unequivocally. That's exactly what I'm thinking about, Lucas declared. In general, the birthday did not go well, and the celebration was spoiled. Lucas thought about how good it would be if his mother-in-law didn't obsess about Amelia and just focused on her granddaughters, as she used to. Another thing that surprised him was how little Isabella mourned her daughter. Of course, with two twins, there was no time to grieve and suffer, sprinkling ashes on their heads. The woman devoted herself to her granddaughters, and Amelia. It seemed like Isabella projected her maternal feelings onto her friend's daughter. She just convinced herself that she was obligated to arrange a wedding for this young schemer. And so, it would be easier for Isabella to cope with her grief. And everything would be fine if it were not at the expense of the girls and Lucas's nervous system. But isn't it clear that the three of them don't need anyone? And if they do, then definitely not Amelia. Well, she was unpleasant to them. As for Amelia, you could understand her. She dreamed of Lucas's millions, and it didn't occur to her that these savings were for the girls' treatment. Although externally they looked healthy, they still kept silent. Amelia was not concerned about this problem. She never asked about the girls' health, which was the main indicator for Lucas. And then a fire happened, not in Lucas's house, but at work. Just at the factory he was building. Naturally, he wasn't personally laying bricks. Lucas was overseeing the project and monitoring the work progress. He was supposed to be the director there. The security guards called in the evening. Smoke was detected. Lucas had to go to work. He understood. The adversaries had moved from words to concrete actions. These were open hostilities. Also, he understood that he couldn't leave Lila and Scarlett home alone. Another thing is when it's daytime, but what about at night? Lucas understood that if a fire had started, he would be at the site until morning, and maybe the whole next day and again at night. Something urgent had to be done. Maybe the neighbors would help? Looking for help, Lucas literally ran out into the street. No one. And not far from him, she was walking along the road. Lucas thought, a vision. He had already gotten used to Sophia appearing everywhere and constantly. But that was in the city, and there was no such thing in the village. He even mentally rejoiced that he had moved here. At least he was rid of these intrusive visions. There was none here again. Lucas looked closely. The girl had her back to him and was walking away along the street. How much she resembled Sophia, figure, hair, gait. But he couldn't see her face. Girl! Lucas shouted. It was a gypsy, and she was dressed like a gypsy. Skirts in an incredible amount and scarves wrapped around the waist. Nevertheless, under all this, Sophia's figure was clearly discernible. When the girl turned her face, Lucas found that it was covered with a scarf. Muslim women do this, and he saw it for the first time among the gypsies. Only her eyes were visible, and he could swear that Sophia's eyes were looking at him. But he wouldn't tear off someone's scarf in the middle of the street and ask questions. Now Lucas had other goals. Is it you? The girl asked. Do you see another girl here? Lucas joked. You know, I need to go to work urgently. There's a big problem there, a fire. But I have no one to leave my daughters with. Will you sit with them for a couple of days as a nanny? There's plenty of food in the fridge at home. I'll pay generously. Aren't you bothered that I'm a gypsy? The girl asked, and her eyes revealed a smile extending under the scarf. Should it bother me? Lucas asked. You know, we're wasting time here. While we're being courteous, the factory is burning. Perhaps people are suffering. Okay. I agree. Where is your house? The girl asked. Lucas pointed with his hand and gave her the keys to the gate, then jumped into the car and rushed to the factory. Oh my God. Oh my God. Lucas thought halfway there. He didn't even ask for the new nanny's name. He didn't tell her that the girls don't talk. But if something happens to them, he won't forgive himself. Lucas was about to turn back halfway, but he saw black smoke over the forest. He realized that the fire was much more serious than he could have imagined. Lucas took a deep breath and silently told himself, enough of the panic, everything will be fine. When Lucas arrived at the village, the fire brigade was already fighting the fire with all their might. Workers were helping to pull something out, disassembling something where the danger had already passed. Lucas joined them and soon felt a little calmer. All night long, like a machine, he worked at the fire, and by morning, joint efforts had resolved everything. Now the police and the prosecutor's office were taking over. And only by a lucky chance, no one was hurt. By lunchtime, he could go home, and it was only then that Lucas felt a wave of excitement. How were the girls? Fool, he left them with some unfamiliar lady, and a gypsy at that. He didn't even ask for her name. What kind of father was he? What kind of idiot? Maybe Isabella was right? Well, of course, not about Amelia, but in general, the girls need constant supervision. And why did he suddenly decide that the gypsy looked like Sophia? Some kind of nonsense. It seems that this paranoia will haunt him all his life. Lucas didn't even remember how he got home. Twice at the turn, he almost went into a ditch. He pulled up to the house and quietly went inside. Some voices, children's laughter. Maybe they're watching TV? Lucas thought. He opened the door to the room and was stunned by what he saw. He couldn't even imagine that he would see such a thing at home. The gypsy was playing some board game with the girls on the floor. The children were laughing and talking to her. But how? For over 2 years, they had been silent, and no one could fix this situation. And here comes some gypsy. She raised her head, saw Lucas, and immediately covered her face with a scarf. The girl jumped up and headed for the exit. I probably should go, she said. Now Lucas could confidently say that this girl looked a lot like Sophia, except that there was a giant birthmark on her face. It covered her chin and part of her lower lip. Now it was clear why she had to cover her face with a scarf. Mom, don't leave, the girls almost shouted in unison. Mom? Lucas was surprised. The girl shrugged. As soon as I came in, they rushed to me and shouted that Mom had returned. I didn't want to disappoint them. Then they showed me photos of their mother and told me she died, the girl replied. And I do look like her, except for, not what you saw on my face. Grandma said I shouldn't show my mark to people. Only children can see it, they are harmless, pure creatures. Grandma? I didn't think you had grandmothers, Lucas exclaimed. Why not? My grandmother raised me. I've never seen my parents, the girl said. You talk, the girls told me. They haven't spoken for many years since their mother's death. How did you do it? Lucas asked. I don't know, the gypsy shrugged again. Maybe the trick is that I didn't know about it. Or maybe my deformity helped them feel that there are people in the world who are not quite normal either. Oh, no. You are normal, very normal. Even more than that. Lucas said. By the way, I'm Lucas. And what's your name? Sabina, the girl replied. My wife's name was Sophia. I know, she said. From where? Lucas wondered. Well, the girls told me. Talk to them more often. They have a secret they're afraid to tell. Probably that's why they were silent, the girl said. Mom, will you come again? The girls shouted. This is not. Lucas began to say. No need, Sabina gently touched his shoulder. Not now. And, in general, I don't mind. Now she came more and more often, and the girls chatted nonstop. Construction at the factory resumed, insurance successfully covered most of the losses, and the board of directors decided not to stop the construction. Life seemed to be getting better. Now Lucas had someone to leave the girls with. He looked more and more closely at Sabina, and she reminded him more and more of Sophia. No, he understood that there are doppelgangers in the world. But still, doppelgangers. They can be similar, but Sabina was like 2 drops of water similar to Sophia. Just if it weren't for her birthmark. One day, Lucas gathered courage and asked her why she always had such sad eyes lately. Indeed, she had been walking around with tearful eyes recently. Is it because of the birthmark? Lucas asked. No. You see, I've lived with it my whole life, and it doesn't bother me. I just got used to it and never saw myself without it. Something else bothers me. You know, I'm a gypsy. They want to marry me off. My grandmother died a long time ago, and the camp decided it was time for me to become someone's wife, Sabina said. What do you mean someone's? Lucas didn't understand. Directly. The Baron is still choosing a groom for me. Whoever he decides, I have to marry him, that's our laws. But the thing is, I don't want to, my heart is not free. I'm already in love, Sabina said. Well, ask your chosen one to marry you, Lucas said. He's not a gypsy, Sabina said. I won't be allowed to marry him. It's like Santa Barbara or something. Lucas said. If they marry me off, I won't be able to come to you. And I've grown so attached to the girls, Sabina cried. How can I help? Lucas asked. Take me away from here, hide me somewhere, pull me out of this gypsy system. You understand? Sabina wanted to say something else, but fell silent. Come on, make a deal, Sabina, he insisted. No, I can't. The girl cried even more and ran away. Lucas thought for a long time about Sabina's request. She didn't really look like a gypsy. Otherwise, his Sophia would also be a gypsy. But maybe just buy her out. No, seriously, what baron would refuse money? Especially millions. The girls were healthy now, and the money could be spent on that. Honestly, Lucas was thinking about charity. Without much thought, he went to the gypsy baron, who lived in the largest house in the village. Everything went much better than Lucas had expected. The baron agreed for less money than Lucas had in mind. He only set one condition: Lucas had to take Sabina away from here as far as possible, so there would be no disputes between the gypsies. As it turned out, Lucas was right, she wasn't really a gypsy. At the age of about 2, she was left in the camp. So she wasn't a gypsy at all. Sabina's upbringing was entrusted to an old childless gypsy. That was her true story. Lucas paid the money and agreed. He wrote to the board of directors of the factory and suggested looking for a new construction supervisor. He was quitting. He was no longer interested in career growth and various projects. Now he wanted to spend as much time as possible with his family. Lucas decided to leave with the girls and Sabina to the south. If you're going to live for pleasure, it should be where it's warm and by the sea. Of course, they couldn't help but visit his mother-in-law. The girls wanted to say goodbye to their grandmother. When they entered the apartment and Isabella saw the gypsy, she screamed and almost fainted. Sabina, the woman, barely pronounced the gypsy's name. Mom! Sabina shouted, and the scarf slowly slid from her face. Lucas didn't understand anything at all. He thought they named Sabina that way because gypsies had left a child. How could his mother-in-law know that name? Was she clairvoyant? Do you know each other? Lucas was surprised. And why do you call my mother-in-law your mother? This is my mother. I barely remember her, but I have a locket. Sabina took out a locket from her bosom, which had 2 photos. On one side was Isabella, and on the other was Lucas's father-in-law. I don't understand anything, Lucas said. Forgive me, my daughter. Just forgive me. Isabella begged and fell to her knees. Sabina lifted her up and sat her on the couch. They hugged and cried for a long time. Then Isabella told Lucas the story of her children. In fact, she gave birth to twins, like Scarlett and Lulu. That's why the arrival of twin granddaughters didn't surprise her. Sophia and Sabina were like 2 peas in a pod, if not for that birthmark. Until the age of 2, they raised the girls with her husband and tried to somehow treat Sabina, but all in vain. In those years, such a condition could only be treated abroad. Isabella was not as strong as her husband. She dreaded the thought of Sabina being teased in daycare and school. She couldn't even bear the thought of it, so she decided to get rid of the girl. She dropped her off at the nearby gypsy camp. No sick child, no problem, the woman decided. She told her husband that gypsies had stolen Sabina. That's when he had his first heart attack, which is why Isabella's father-in-law always had a weak heart. That's why he couldn't bear the loss of his second daughter. He had already lost one. The girls were still small and probably didn't remember much. The spouses decided not to tell Sophia that she had a twin sister. They would probably never meet. It was a cruel decision. Isabella mourned Sophia's death, but it was easier for her. She knew that somewhere on Earth, perhaps, her second daughter was walking, and she didn't even suspect that fate would reunite them. Lucas suggested Sabina undergo surgery to remove the birthmark, and she agreed. When everything was done, and Sabina was released from the hospital, she looked just like her sister Sophia. "Well, now, if your beloved sees you, he won't recognize you," Lucas joked. "He will," Sabina said. "By the way, how did you decide to leave him so far away? Isn't it very difficult to be separated?" Lucas asked. "But I didn't leave. My beloved has always been with me," Sabina said and kissed Lucas. Before moving to the south, they decided to get married. Scarlett and Lulu were simply delighted. They already understood that this woman was their mother's sister and still enthusiastically called her mom. The wedding wasn't luxurious or lavish, but it happened. Isabella gave up trying to match Amelia with Lucas, but they still invited her to the wedding with her mother. As soon as the twins saw Amelia at the registry office, they hugged each other again and fell silent. "Girls, what's wrong with you? Don't be afraid of anyone, now Mom is with you," Sabina said. "It's her." Scarlett and Lulu shouted in unison. "Now we're not afraid, now we can talk. She killed our mom." There was an awkward pause. "Baby, you're confusing something." "How could I do that?" "I'm not a murderer," Amelia began to babble. "You were behind the wheel of the car that hit Mom," the girls continued to shout. "Yes, you couldn't see me then. You were too small." Amelia yelled and fell silent. Comments, as they say, were unnecessary. She was detained, the police were called. Denying anything was useless, she exposed herself. It turns out, Amelia had long set her sights on Lucas when he and Sophia were still engaged. Seeing Sophia with the children at the crossing one day, she decided to end it all at once. But there was a hitch. The girls survived and remembered her. They were just very afraid that she would do something to them. The girls vowed to each other never to speak so as not to reveal the secret. That's why the doctors couldn't do anything about it. When they saw Sabina in the village, they decided that their mom had returned to them. Little children don't understand what death is. They thought that now they were under protection and could tell the murderer what they knew to her face. In fact, that's what happened. Sabina became their protection and a real mother. The family successfully acquired a house on the seaside and moved, taking Grandma Isabella with them. She couldn't be happier with Scarlett and Lulu, as well as the twin boys born to Sabina in the south. No one had any birthmarks. They could live happily.